1 Mile is an American action thriller film. It was produced in the United States by Capital Entertainment and Nomadic Pictures. However, the actual filming did not take place in the United States. Principal photography was carried out in Canada, specifically on Vancouver Island in the province of British Columbia. The filming locations included Ladysmith, Port Alberni, Parksville, Qualicum Beach, and Victoria. The lush forests, remote roads, and isolated landscapes of British Columbia were used to create that feeling of absolute wilderness and isolation that the story demands. Post-production work for both films was handled in Vancouver. The film was directed by Adam Davidson, a director well known in the television world for his work on the series Shooter. Davidson brought a very grounded and realistic approach to the action in this film, which we will talk about more when we get into the style and tone of the movie. The screenplay was written by John Hlavin, T.J. Brady, and Rashid Newson. T.J. Brady and Rashid Newson are also known for their work on the Showtime series The Chi, which was produced by Capital Entertainment. The story itself was originally conceived by John Hlavin and Josh Center. Now here is one of the most interesting things about this entire project. The original idea for 1 Mile did not come from a seasoned Hollywood writer or a veteran filmmaker. It came from Jaden Kaplan, the daughter of producer Aaron Kaplan. She developed this idea back in 2019 while she was on an actual college tour with her father in the Northeast United States. They were driving along a long, desolate highway bordered by thick woods and frozen lakes on both sides, and that setting planted a thought in her mind. What if something dangerous happened out here in this isolation? What if a family driving through this kind of remote wilderness encountered something violent and terrifying and had absolutely no help nearby? That single thought, born out of a Rio road trip, eventually became 1 Mile. For Capital Entertainment, this project was also historic in another way. It marked the company's very first venture into producing feature films. Plot details. Now let us get into the actual story of the film. The plot of 1 Mile follows Daniel Beckett, who goes by the name Danny, a recently retired United States Army Special Forces soldier. Danny is a man who spent the vast majority of his adult life serving in the military. He is skilled, disciplined, and trained in some of the most intense forms of combat and survival that exist. But all of that service came at a very personal cost. His career kept him away from his family for long stretches of time, and as a result, his marriage fell apart, and his relationship with his teenage daughter Alex became distant and strained. There is real pain between them, not anger from a lack of love, but from years of absence and emotional disconnect. Now retired, Danny is trying to do something he should have done much earlier. He is trying to rebuild those broken relationships. He wants to be a real father again. He wants to reconnect with Alex and show her that he is present in her life now. One of the ways he tries to do this is by offering to take Alex on a college tour road trip. It is his attempt at spending meaningful time with her, getting to know her again, and hopefully repairing some of the damage that years of military service caused in their relationship. The road trip begins, and for a while it is exactly what it is supposed to be, a father and daughter trying to find common ground, driving through unfamiliar territory and spending time together. But then things go wrong in the most dangerous possible way. At some point during their journey, they take a wrong turn. They find themselves on a remote, isolated stretch of road deep in the wilderness, far away from any towns, any help, or any communication. It is here that they encounter a group of extremely dangerous individuals, a secretive, violent, off-the-grid community living deep in the wilderness, completely cut off from mainstream society. These are not ordinary criminals. This is an organized community with their own rules, their own leadership, and a willingness to use extreme violence to protect their way of life and to take what they want from outsiders. The situation escalates rapidly. The community attacks Danny and Alex. Alex is kidnapped and taken into the depths of the wilderness, deeper into the territory controlled by this hostile group. Danny, despite being alone and completely outnumbered, refuses to walk away or call it impossible. Every instinct he built over decades of military service kicks in. He goes off the grid himself, moving through the wilderness with the same kind of precision, patience, and tactical intelligence he used in combat zones. He tracks the group, studies their movements, and begins dismantling their operation piece by piece. He is not just a desperate father, he is a trained operator who knows exactly how to survive, how to hunt, and how to fight. What makes this story compelling on a human level is not just the action but the emotional backdrop. Danny is fighting not only to save his daughter's life but also for something he never fully had, the chance to be her father. The mission to bring Alex home is also a mission to prove to himself and to her that he will always show up when it matters most. Chapter 2 of the story picks up directly after the first part. After Danny manages to rescue Alex in the first chapter, the danger is far from over. The community comes back for revenge. They abduct Alex again, forcing Danny to go back into that remote island territory one more time. Now the community is prepared for him. They know what he is capable of, they know his tactics, and they have set up their defenses specifically to stop him. But Danny has no choice. He goes in again, alone, against a group that is now actively hunting him. And the second chapter follows his relentless fight to end this threat permanently, and bring his daughter home for good. One of the most notable creative decisions made by director Adam Davidson was to strip away a large amount of conventional gunplay from the action sequences. Instead of the standard Hollywood shoot-'em-up approach, the film relies heavily on hand-to-hand combat, close-quarters fighting, and survival-based confrontations. Ryan Phillip himself described this approach by saying it feels like a throwback to a 1970s movie, referencing films like Walking Tall and Death Wish. He noted that by eliminating most of the gunplay, the action becomes face-to-face and far more personal and uncomfortable to watch. Cast. Now let us talk about the people who brought this story to life on screen. Ryan Phillip plays the lead role of Danny Beckett. Phillip is an American actor who has been working in Hollywood since the 1990s. He is perhaps best known to wider audiences from films like Cruel Intentions, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Flags of Our Fathers. His breakout into more serious dramatic territory came with the Academy Award-winning film Crash in 2004. In recent years, Phillip has worked primarily in the television and direct-to-digital space, and 1 Mile represents one of his strongest physical performances in recent memory. He was 51 years old during production and brought real intensity and physicality to the role of Danny. Amelie Hofrel plays Alex Beckett, Danny's teenage daughter. Hofrel is a young American actress who has been building her career steadily in both film and television. Her role in 1 Mile is central to the emotional core of the story. She is not just a victim waiting to be rescued but a character whose complicated relationship with her father gives the film its emotional weight. C. Thomas Howell is another key member of the cast. Howell is a veteran American actor who rose to fame in the 1980s with films like The Outsiders and Soul Man. In 1 Mile, he appears in a supporting role that adds depth to the overall story. Sarah Canning plays Danny's estranged wife. Canning is a Canadian actress known for her work in television, including her role in The Vampire Diaries. Her character represents the domestic life that Danny stepped away from and is now trying to return to. Richard Harmon, Sage Linder, and James Michaelopoulos round out the supporting cast, adding various layers to the story on both the protagonist and antagonist sides. Release date and distribution. 1 Mile, Chapter 1 and 1 Mile, Chapter 2 were both released simultaneously on February 20, 2026. This was a deliberate decision by the producers and distribution team, to drop both chapters at the exact same time so that audiences could experience the full story without having to wait. Republic Pictures, which is a label under Paramount Pictures, handled the distribution of both films. Republic Pictures released the official trailer on February 5, 2026, giving audiences just over 2 weeks of promotional build-up before the release date. Both films were made available on digital platforms to rent or own. This means the release was a VOD and digital-only release, not a wide theatrical run. The runtime of each chapter is approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes, meaning the total combined runtime of both chapters comes in at just under 3 hours. The MPAA rating for both chapters is R, meaning the films are rated for strong violence and language. This is consistent with the tone of the film, which does not shy away from brutal, close-quarters combat and intense survival sequences. Trailer info. The official trailer for 1 Mile was released by Republic Pictures on February 5, 2026, 15 days before the films became available. The trailer established the tone of the movie very clearly from the opening moments, showing the father and daughter road trip quickly descending into chaos and danger. One of the most memorable lines from the trailer comes from Ryan Phillips' character Danny, who looks directly into the camera and says, "These guys don't know it yet, but they messed with the wrong dad." That single line captured the entire premise of the film and gave audiences a clear sense of what kind of movie this was going to be. The trailer was well received among fans of the action thriller genre and generated significant buzz leading up to the February 20th release. Reception. 1 Mile received a mixed response from audiences and critics. On IMDb, Chapter 1 holds a score of 5.7 out of 10, while Chapter 2 sits lower at 4.8. Many viewers praised Ryan Phillips' physical performance and the film's grounded approach to action. The production value was considered solid for a low-budget direct-to-digital release. However, a common criticism was that the story did not need to be split into 2 parts, with some reviewers calling the 2-part structure a marketing decision rather than a creative one. Critics also pointed out similarities to other films in the same genre, particularly Taken, though many acknowledged that as a straightforward survival thriller with a clear emotional backbone, 1 Mile delivered exactly what it promised. Final thoughts. 1 Mile is not a film trying to reinvent the genre. It is a lean, grounded father versus wilderness thriller that puts a trained military man up against impossible odds in the most isolated environment imaginable. It is powered by a believable emotional core, a broken father-daughter relationship that gives every fight scene and every survival moment real stakes beyond just physical danger. Ryan Phillips carries the film on his shoulders and delivers one of his more committed physical performances in years. If you enjoy survival thrillers, films about fathers fighting impossible odds, and action that feels personal rather than cinematic and polished, 1 Mile is worth your time. Watch Chapter 1 first, and if it hooks you, Chapter 2 is right there waiting. 1 Mile, 2026, the complete story of both chapters. Chapter 1, The Beginning. The story of 1 Mile begins not with its main character but with 2 young people, a couple named Lily and Brandon. They are on a road trip together, young, in love, and full of energy. They find a beautiful lakeside campground tucked away in the woods, far from the noise and crowds of everyday life. The place is quiet and peaceful. They set up there and spend some time together, enjoying the stillness of the wilderness around them. But that peace is shattered in the most violent way possible. Men emerge from the tree line, moving silently through the bushes. One of them fires a crossbow, and the bolt pins Brandon to the ground. Brandon is helpless. While some of the men keep him incapacitated, others drag Lily away forcefully, ignoring her screams. The opening moments of the film immediately establish that this wilderness holds something dark and deeply sinister, and that whatever lives out there in those woods preys on innocent people who wander too close. The story then shifts focus entirely to the man at the center of this film. His name is Daniel Beckett, but everyone calls him Danny. Danny is a recently retired United States Army Special Forces soldier. He has spent the better part of his adult life deployed, operating in dangerous environments around the world, and dedicating himself entirely to the military. He is disciplined, precise, hardened, and trained to handle situations that would break most ordinary people. But all of that dedication to service came at a personal cost that can never be fully calculated. While Danny was overseas, his marriage slowly fell apart. His wife Janine had to raise their daughter Alex almost entirely on her own. And Alex, who grew up barely seeing her father, developed a deep emotional distance from him, not out of hatred, but out of years of longing for a presence that was never there. When we first meet Danny as a civilian, he is attending Alex's soccer match. This small scene is significant. Janine seems surprised but not displeased to see him there. Danny is clearly trying. He wants to reconnect. When Alex sees her father in the crowd, she is visibly shocked. She did not expect him to be there. She does not run to him with open arms. There is a long silence between them, a weight that comes from years of absence. Alex scores a crucial goal for her team and wins the match, but the emotional distance between her and her father is still palpable when they are around each other afterward. The next day, Danny decides to take Alex on a road trip to visit some college campuses. This is his attempt at spending time with her, at being a real father. It is his way of saying, without words, that he is present now, that he is trying, and that he wants to know who his daughter has become. The drive begins with long stretches of uncomfortable silence. Danny tries to start conversations. He glances over at what Alex is scrolling on her phone. He searches for something to say, some common ground to stand on. But Alex is guarded. She is not rude or aggressive, she is simply cautious, because opening up to someone who is absent for most of your life is not something that happens instantly. They visit a few colleges along the way. At one of them, a coordinator asks Danny about Alex's favorite subject, and Danny does not know the answer. He hesitates. Alex notices. That moment stings for both of them, for Danny because it reveals how little he actually knows about his own daughter, and for Alex because it confirms what she has always known. But then something shifts. Danny, at some point, comes across Alex's notebook. It is filled with her artwork, detailed, expressive illustrations that reveal a mind with real creative depth. Danny looks at them carefully and praises her genuinely. He sees her talent and tells her so. For Alex, that moment of recognition from her father does something small but meaningful. She begins to lower her guard, just slightly. She starts talking a little more. Danny comes to understand that Alex does not want to go to just any college. She has a specific art college in mind that she has been dreaming about. This small discovery opens a door between them that had been shut for years. As evening falls, they have not found a motel nearby. They come across a roadside cabin, a small petrol station and general store. Danny refuels the car. While he does, Alex goes inside to use the washroom. In the back of the store, she comes across a man who gives her an immediate, deeply unsettling feeling. There is something wrong about him, something threatening in the way he looks at her. She comes back to Danny and says nothing, but the encounter sticks with her. The cashier, a woman working at the register, cheerfully directs them toward a campground nearby on a road called 1 Mile Road. She describes it as a beautiful spot for camping. Danny and Alex drive out to it. When they arrive, the campground is quiet and seemingly empty. Danny decides they will set up camp here for the night. He and Alex head into the nearby woods to gather some supplies and firewood. It is dark, the trees are thick, and the atmosphere is heavy. Then Danny hears it, rustling in the trees. Movement. Something is out there, moving deliberately through the dark. Within moments, armed men burst out of the forest. These are the same men who attacked Lily and Brandon at the very start of the film. They are organized, aggressive, and dangerous. Crossbow bolts fly through the air in Danny's direction. Danny, drawing instantly on his military reflexes, does not freeze. He moves. He fights off 2 men in close combat with raw efficiency and grabs Alex, and they run deep into the woods together. This is the moment the film transforms from a quiet story about a broken family trying to heal into a full-blown survival thriller. The wilderness battle. Danny and Alex push deep into the forest, putting distance between themselves and their attackers. They eventually find a sheltered spot near a cave and stop to catch their breath. Alex, who has never experienced anything remotely like this in her life, suffers a panic attack. The fear, the shock, and the adrenaline all crash down on her at once. Danny, calm and measured despite the danger, talks her through it. He uses the same quiet control that carried him through combat operations, and he brings her back from the edge of panic. In this moment, something shifts between them again. The walls come down a little more, because nothing strips away pretense faster than genuine danger. As they look for a more secure shelter, they locate an old trailer deeper in the woods. Danny goes to check it out and make sure it is safe. While he is doing this, one of Stanley's men, a man named Nicky, ambushes Alex from behind. He grabs her. He is bigger and stronger. But Alex does not give in. She fights back with everything she has, and in the struggle, she manages to get hold of Nicky's own knife and stabs him with it. It is a brutal, desperate act of self-preservation, and it marks a turning point in Alex's character. She is not a passive victim. She is her father's daughter. She has a core of toughness that even she did not know about until it was forced out of her. Meanwhile, Danny is attacked by one of Stanley's most physically powerful enforcers, a man named Gar. Danny and Gar engage in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. Danny eventually gets the upper hand by using the environment against Gar, trapping him behind the trailer and incapacitating him. Danny and Alex are reunited and continue their escape. They reach a river and take cover beneath the boulders along its edge. The cold of the water and the night are brutal, but Danny holds Alex close to keep her warm, and tells her to sleep while he stands guard. It is a quiet, human moment buried deep inside a violent story. A father finally being there for his daughter in the most literal, physical sense possible. Alex falls asleep in his arms for the first time in years. When morning comes, Stanley's men find them again. Another attack. Another desperate fight. Danny takes a knife wound to the shoulder during the chaos. The pain slows him down, but he keeps moving. They cross the river, trying to use the water to confuse their trackers. But Stanley's men are experienced in this terrain. They catch up again. This time, Stanley himself arrives on the scene. He is the leader of this off-grid community, a cold, authoritarian patriarch who rules his people through intimidation, fear, and the absolute enforcement of his own twisted will. One of Stanley's men strikes Danny across the head with enough force to knock him unconscious. Danny collapses. Stanley's men throw his body into the river, assuming the water and the blood loss from his shoulder wound will finish him. Then they take Alex. Who is Stanley and what does he want? Stanley Dixon is not just a violent criminal operating in the wilderness. He is the leader of an entire community of people who have chosen to live completely off the grid, isolated from modern society. This community was once self-sufficient and functional, but a crisis struck. Over time, the women in the community began losing their fertility. The community faced extinction if they could not produce children. Rather than seek outside medical help or accept the reality of their situation, Stanley chose a horrifying solution. He began sending his people out to lure women from the outside world into his territory. The cashier at the roadside cabin is one of his own, planted there deliberately to direct unsuspecting travelers toward the campground on 1 Mile Road. This is his trap. When an outsider, particularly a woman, arrives at that campground, Stanley's men move in. They abduct the woman, bring her into the community's territory, and force her to carry children for his people. The young woman named Lily, who was kidnapped in the opening scene, is already deep inside this nightmare. She is being kept in a cabin, pregnant with a child she never chose to carry. She is not free. She is not safe. She is simply a prisoner dressed up in the language of community, and belonging by Stanley, who insists he is doing what is necessary for survival. When Alex is brought in, Stanley's plan is exactly the same. He intends to keep her there, to use her the same way he used Lily and every woman before her. He sees outsiders not as human beings with rights and freedom, but as resources. The cruelty of his worldview is wrapped in a kind of patriarchal logic that he has convinced himself is noble. He is protecting his community, preserving his people's future, and doing what must be done. His community follows him not because they genuinely believe in his vision but because they are afraid of what happens to those who defy him. Danny fights back. Despite losing enormous amounts of blood from his shoulder wound, Danny regains consciousness in the river. He drags himself out of the water and does not stop. He does not call for help. There is no help to call. He is alone, injured, deep in hostile territory, and his daughter has been taken. He begins moving through the forest using the same methodical, tactical patience that defined his career as a special forces operator. He uses his knowledge of ambush tactics, environmental navigation, and close-quarters combat to work his way past the checkpoints that Stanley's men have set up throughout the woods. He finds a cabin and eliminates the men stationed outside. When he enters, he finds Stanley's son inside, sitting with several armed enforcers. Danny, despite being outnumbered and wounded, takes control of the situation. He ties them all up and begins getting information out of them. He forces answers. He finds out where Stanley is, where Alex is being held, and how the layout of the community's territory works. Then Danny does something psychologically precise. He contacts Stanley and threatens to kill his son if Stanley does not come to the cabin himself. Stanley, despite his coldness, has one genuine attachment, his son. He agrees and arrives at the cabin with the rest of his men. But Danny, trained to anticipate exactly this kind of response, has already prepared for it. He has left the oven on and allowed gas to fill the space around the cabin. He has rigged a match against the freezer door so that when someone closes it, the match will ignite and the accumulated gas will explode. When Stanley arrives with Alex and his men begin to move in on Danny, Danny makes his move. He grabs Alex. They get inside the heavy freezer. Danny pulls the door shut. The match ignites. The gas catches. The explosion tears through the cabin with devastating force. Everyone in the room outside the freezer, Stanley's men, is caught in it. They are killed. Stanley himself survives, though he is badly injured and burned. In the chaos and the fire, Danny and Alex escape. In the final scene of Chapter 1, Danny and Janine are seen dropping Alex off at the residential art college she always wanted to attend. It feels like a resolution. Alex walks toward the campus and turns back to embrace both her parents warmly. The family is together. The nightmare seems to be over. But in the shadows, watching the whole thing from the darkness, is a figure. It is Stanley. Burned, injured, but alive. And he has not forgotten what Danny did to his son. Chapter 2: The Revenge. Chapter 2 begins some time after the events of Chapter 1. Alex has settled into her new life at the residential art college. She has made friends, a close companion named Carrie who has been a steady presence for her, and a classmate named Justin who is clearly interested in her romantically. Alex has been trying to rebuild her sense of normalcy. But the trauma of what she experienced on 1 Mile Road has not left her. It shows up in her art. Her paintings and illustrations carry dark, heavy themes that reflect what she went through. Despite that, she is still present in her life. She is still trying. She shows up every day and pushes forward. Back at home, Danny is retired and spending time with Janine. He has been in contact with an old colleague from his Special Forces days about a possible private security job, but Janine wants him to stay home. She has spent too many years without him, and she does not want him to disappear again, even for legitimate work. The holidays arrive, and Alex is coming home. It is supposed to be a simple, joyful occasion, a family reunion, a warm homecoming. Alex spends her last night at school celebrating with her friends. She has dinner with Carrie, Justin, and others. She catches her ride to the airport. She gets into a car she ordered, settles in, and then looks at the driver's face in the rearview mirror. Her blood goes cold. There is something wrong about that man. Something she recognizes on an instinctive, visceral level. Before she can react, she is taken. The driver is one of Stanley's men, and Alex is being brought back. Alex in captivity, again. When Alex wakes up, she is inside a cabin on the same island where she was held before. It is the same room. The same walls. The same suffocating feeling of being trapped with no way out. But this time she is not alone in the room for long. Lily is there. Lily, who was pregnant when Alex last saw her, has given birth to her son. She named the baby Brandon, after her boyfriend who was killed at the beginning of Chapter 1. Lily has been living on the island this entire time. She has accepted it as her home, not because she loves it, but because she has no other option she can see. Alex immediately begins talking to Lily about escaping. She pushes, she reasons, she tries to convince Lily that there is another way. Lily resists at first. The island is all she knows now. She has a baby here. Where would she even go? But then Alex tells her something that changes everything. Danny is coming. Her father is coming for her. The moment Lily hears that, something breaks loose inside her. For the first time in a long time, she allows herself to think about a life outside those walls. Stanley has already called Danny and told him where Alex is. He wants Danny to come. He is not hiding. He is inviting the confrontation because he wants to kill Danny personally, as revenge for his son's death. He has Alex as bait, and he is using her to draw Danny in. Inside the cabin, Lily formulates a plan. She cannot do much openly because she is constantly watched, but she manages to slip a small note through a crack in the wall to Alex, telling her about a cove at the edge of the island's territory, a distant hideout that Stanley's people rarely monitor. She tells Alex to make a run for it. Alex puts together a plan to get herself out of the locked room. She fakes illness. When one of Stanley's guards comes in to check on her, she attacks him. She stabs the guard and runs, heading for the cove that Lily described. Stanley finds out she has escaped almost immediately. He searches the cabin and finds Lily's note. He knows exactly what happened and exactly where Alex is going. He sends his men after her. They catch her before she reaches the cove. When Alex is brought back, Stanley turns his fury on Lily for helping her. He brings Lily and a man named Wayne into a room in front of the community. Wayne is a member of the community who has a quiet moral courage about him. He has always known more about what is really happening there than he lets on. When Alex was first brought to the island in Chapter 1, Wayne had already known something significant, that Lily was already pregnant with Brandon's child when she arrived on the island. He knew the baby was not a product of the community. He simply kept quiet and let it play out. Stanley humiliates Lily in front of everyone, ignoring her pleas for forgiveness. He has her locked away and instructs an elderly woman to discipline her. Alex is moved to a separate, more isolated storage room in another cabin. Danny infiltrates the island. Danny arrives at the island. He does not come in loudly or with any kind of aggressive announcement. He moves the way he always moves, quietly, methodically, one step at a time. He gets himself captured deliberately, surrendering to a group of Stanley's men and handing over what appears to be his weapon. The men believe they have him. Within seconds, Danny uses every bit of his combat training to take them down. He forces them to drive a boat towards Stanley's primary hideout on the island. When the boat approaches, Danny does not wait for it to dock. He slips into the water, swims around to a different entry point, and crawls toward the compound from an angle they are not watching. He works his way through the engine room, setting up traps throughout the space, rigged mechanisms that will trigger when Stanley's men pass through. What follows is methodical and brutal. Danny moves through the compound, eliminating Stanley's guards one by one using the traps he has laid, as well as direct hand-to-hand combat when necessary. He does not hesitate. He does not waver. The part of him that is a soldier is completely in control, and that soldier is fighting for his daughter. He gets close to the cabin where Alex is being held. But one of Stanley's armed guards gets the drop on him and forces Danny inside at gunpoint. Danny enters the cabin, and there is Alex. They hold each other. In a quiet moment in the middle of all that danger, a father and his daughter are simply together. They use the time they have to put together a plan for getting out. Lily, carrying baby Brandon, manages to sneak past the guards and find Alex. The three of them, Alex, Lily, and the baby, slip out and make a run for the river. Danny covers their escape. The final confrontation. Stanley, who has been monitoring everything, realizes that Danny, Alex, and Lily are moving. He makes his most devastating counter-move. He does not go after Alex and Lily. He goes after Janine. He captures Danny's wife and contacts Danny over a walkie-talkie, letting Danny hear Janine's voice so he knows exactly what is at stake. Danny has no choice. He turns around and comes back to the compound. Meanwhile, something unexpected is building inside the community. Wayne has been watching everything that has happened, and he has had enough. When Stanley confronts him, Wayne does not cower. He stands there and speaks truth to Stanley directly, questioning Stanley's methods and his leadership. He challenges the man who holds the whole community in fear. For a community that has lived under Stanley's rule for years, seeing someone speak openly against him is a shock. But Stanley's response is immediate and merciless. He shoots Wayne in front of everyone, in front of the entire community that has lived in fear of him. Every person standing there witnesses it. The man who promised to protect them kills one of their own without hesitation. Lily, who is already in shock and grief, watches from a distance. Something in her shifts into a completely different gear. Stanley then focuses entirely on Danny. He has Janine. He has the upper hand. He mocks Danny, forces him to kneel, and prepares to shoot him in the face. He wants Danny to understand in his final moments that he has lost, that revenge is complete. Danny, knowing what is about to happen, does something he has never done easily before. He expresses his love. He tells Alex and Janine clearly and without reservation that he loves them. It is not a dramatic speech. It is raw, sincere, and final. He does not know if he will survive the next few seconds. What Stanley does not know is that Alex has been moving. While Stanley was locked in his moment of dominance, and focused entirely on Danny, Alex slipped away into the compound. She found Stanley's private office. She found the firearms he keeps there. An elderly woman inside the office tries to stop her. But something has changed in Alex across these 2 chapters. She is not the girl who sat in awkward silence on a car ride looking at her phone. She has been through things that most people cannot imagine, and she has survived all of it. The elderly woman looks at her and sees that courage. Something shifts in the old woman too, and she steps aside. As Stanley points his gun at Danny's head and prepares to fire, a gunshot rings out across the quiet island. It is not Stanley's shot. Stanley falls to the ground with a wound in his left eye. He is dead. Alex shot him from a concealed position with the rifle she took from his office. The daughter who Danny spent 2 chapters fighting to protect is the one who ultimately ends the threat. She did not need to be saved in the final moment. She saved her father. The rest of the community does not intervene. With Stanley dead, the reign of terror over them is finished. There is no loyalty left to act on, only relief. Danny, Alex, Janine, Lily, and baby Brandon all get on a boat together and leave the island. It is over. The family is together. Lily, who spent so long believing the island was her only home, is finally free. And the baby Brandon carries with him into that freedom the name of the man who first loved his mother and was taken from her before he could ever know his son. The ending and what it means. The ending of 1 Mile across both chapters is fundamentally a story about what it means to finally show up for the people you love. Danny Beckett spent decades being the most capable man in any combat zone, but he was never present where it mattered most, at home, with his family. The events of 1 Mile did not simply give him a mission. They gave him a reason to use everything he is in service of the people he should have always been protecting. And in the process, they gave Alex a chance to discover her own strength, her own courage, and ultimately to be the one who ends the nightmare for both of them. The story closes not with a celebration or a triumphant sequence but with something quieter, a family moving forward together, finally and completely, with nothing left between them but time and the chance to use it well. You said, give me actors' life history in lengthy details. Give me actors' life history in lengthy details. Don't give resources with it. Don't give too much headings. 09:25 Claude responded. Here is the complete and lengthy life history of all the major actors from 1 Mile. Assembled comprehensive biographical narratives for 4 actors. Assembled comprehensive biographical narratives for 4 actors. Here is the complete and lengthy life history of all the major actors from 1 Mile. The actors of 1 Mile, complete life histories. Ryan Phillip. Ryan Phillip is one of those actors whose life story is almost as interesting as any of the characters he has ever played on screen. He was born Matthew Ryan Phillip on September 10, 1974, in the small city of Newcastle, Delaware. He grew up in a working-class, middle American household that had absolutely nothing to do with Hollywood or the entertainment industry. His mother Susan managed a daycare center that she ran out of the family home, making the house a constant hub of activity and children coming and going. His father Richard worked as a chemical technician. Ryan was the only boy in the family, growing up alongside 3 sisters named Kirsten, Lindsay, and Caitlin, which many who know him say contributed greatly to the sensitivity and emotional intelligence he has always brought to his acting. Newcastle was not a place that produced movie stars. It was a tight-knit, working-class community with a strong sense of local identity. Ryan attended the Newcastle Baptist Academy, where he was genuinely active and athletic. He played basketball and soccer with real dedication, and he also took up taekwondo with the same level of commitment, eventually earning himself a black belt in the martial art. That combination of discipline, athleticism, and competitive drive would serve him throughout his life in ways he did not yet understand when he was a teenager practicing kicks in a dojo in Delaware. The turn toward acting came when Ryan was around 15 years old. By that age, he had already started thinking seriously about a future in performance. Then something happened that nobody could have planned. He was sitting in a barbershop in Delaware when a casting agent happened to notice him. The agent saw something in the teenager, a look, a presence, something magnetic, and approached him. Ryan was taken to New York to begin auditioning. Those early auditions did not produce immediate results. The entertainment industry is not kind to newcomers, and Ryan spent time working as a model to keep himself going financially. He signed with Kathy Parker Management in New Jersey and kept pushing. His patience paid off in 1992 when he landed a role on the long-running American soap opera One Life to Live. He was 17 years old, and the role he was given was not a small, background part. He was cast as Billy Douglas, a character who was specifically written as the first openly gay teenager ever portrayed on daytime television in the United States. This was a genuinely bold and socially significant piece of casting and writing for 1992, when attitudes toward LGBTQ representation were nowhere near where they are today. Billy Douglas struggled with coming out, faced the community's anti-gay reactions, and navigated the emotional complexity of being a young person who is different in a world that does not always accept difference. Ryan played this role with a maturity and sensitivity that earned him real recognition. He stayed with the show until 1993. After leaving the soap, he relocated to Los Angeles, the move that almost every serious actor eventually has to make. He did what most young actors do. He picked up guest spots on various television shows, including appearances on Matlock and Due South, building his resume one credit at a time. His transition into film came gradually. He had a small role in the 1995 naval thriller Crimson Tide, followed by appearances in White Squall in 1996 and the indie film Nowhere in 1997. These were not the roles that would make his name known to general audiences, but they were building his craft and his confidence on camera. The moment that changed everything arrived in 1997 with I Know What You Did Last Summer. This was a major Hollywood horror film starring Jennifer Love Hewitt, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Freddie Prinze Jr., and Ryan himself. The film was a massive commercial success and turned Ryan into a certified teen idol almost overnight. He had the look, the talent, and the timing, and audiences responded immediately. In 1998 he appeared in the studio drama 54, about the infamous New York nightclub Studio 54, and in Playing by Heart, alongside Sean Connery and Gillian Anderson. But it was 1999 that truly cemented Ryan Phillips' place in the cultural consciousness of a generation. He appeared in Cruel Intentions, the stylish, provocative drama based on the classic French novel Dangerous Liaisons. He played Sébastien Valmont, a charming, manipulative young socialite who makes a wager with his equally cruel stepsister, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, over the seduction of an innocent girl played by Reese Witherspoon. The film became a cult classic and is still talked about today. It was dark, sensual, witty, and carried by a cast that had extraordinary chemistry on screen. The connection between Ryan and Reese Witherspoon on screen was palpable, and that was because off-screen, they had already fallen in love. Ryan Phillip and Reese Witherspoon had begun their relationship and were together by the time Cruel Intentions was released. They married in 1999 in an elegant ceremony in Charleston, South Carolina, and for many years they were one of Hollywood's most admired and celebrated couples. Together they had 2 children, a daughter named Ava Elizabeth Phillip, born in 1999, and a son named Deacon Reese Phillip, born in 2003. Ryan and Reese were together for 9 years in total, but in 2006 they announced their separation, and in 2007 Reese filed for divorce. The split was widely covered by the media, and it was a genuinely difficult period in Ryan's personal life. He has spoken in various interviews over the years about the challenges of co-parenting while maintaining a career, and by all accounts both he and Reese have remained committed to raising their children well despite the end of their marriage. Ryan also has a 3rd child, a daughter named Kai Knapp, born in 2011, from a relationship with actress Alexis Knapp, whom he met while she was working on a film. In 2004, Ryan appeared in what became one of the most critically praised ensemble films of that era. Paul Haggis's Crash was a deeply uncomfortable and unflinching exploration of racism, interconnection, and human nature set against the backdrop of Los Angeles. The film featured an enormous ensemble cast including Sandra Bullock, Don Cheadle, Matt Dillon, Terrence Howard, and Ryan Phillip, who played a young police officer wrestling with his own racial biases. The film won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 2006, and the entire cast received a Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Cast. It remains one of the most significant films of Ryan's career and demonstrated that he was capable of far more than the teen idol roles that had first brought him to prominence. He continued working at a high level through the mid-2000s. He appeared in Clint Eastwood's Flags of Our Fathers in 2006, a powerful and deeply serious film about the soldiers who raised the American flag at Iwo Jima during World War II. In 2008 he starred in Stop Loss, a film directed by Kimberly Pierce that dealt unflinchingly with the emotional toll of war on soldiers who are sent back to combat against their will. These were serious, committed performances in films that had real things to say about America and its relationship with war. As the 2010s progressed, Ryan moved more deeply into television. One of his most significant television roles came in the series Shooter, which premiered on USA Network in 2016. Based on the film of the same name, which itself was based on the novel Point of Impact by Stephen Hunter, Shooter featured Ryan as Bob Lee Swagger, a Marine sniper who is framed for an assassination attempt on the president and must fight to clear his name. The show ran for 3 seasons and demonstrated that Ryan could anchor a long-form action thriller with real presence and physical commitment. By the time he took on the role of Danny Beckett in 1 Mile in 2026, Ryan Phillip was 51 years old and had been working in the entertainment industry for over 3 decades. He has spoken about the physicality required for the role and the way the film intentionally stripped out most of the conventional gunplay in favor of hand-to-hand, close-quarters combat that felt raw and personal. The result was one of his most committed physical performances in recent memory, and audiences who saw the film largely agreed that he carried it with genuine intensity and emotional authenticity. C. Thomas Howell. Christopher Thomas Howell was born on December 7, 1966, in the Van Nuys neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. Unlike Ryan Phillip, who came from a world completely outside the entertainment industry, C. Thomas Howell was born directly into it. His father, Christopher N. Howell, was a professional bull rider who transitioned into a career as a Hollywood stunt coordinator, one of the most physically demanding and specialized roles in the film industry. Growing up in Los Angeles with a father who worked on actual film sets, Tommy, as he was nicknamed, was surrounded by the machinery of movie making from an extremely young age. He has 3 siblings, and growing up, the children of a stunt coordinator naturally absorbed a love for physical performance, action, and the world of entertainment. His father's influence was enormous. Tommy spent time on film sets as a child, watched his father work, and absorbed everything around him. From a very early age, he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. Though not necessarily as an actor, he initially wanted to become a stuntman. That desire to do the physical, dangerous work rather than speak the lines says something about who he was as a child: action-oriented, physical, brave, and drawn to the visceral side of filmmaking. But his acting career began before he had a chance to fully develop those stunt ambitions. He appeared in the Brian Keith Show at the age of 4, one of the very earliest documented appearances of a child actor who would go on to become a genuine Hollywood star. That was not an audition or a planned career move. It was simply a child being around the industry his father worked in. From there, he continued appearing in various projects throughout his early childhood. He was also deeply involved in rodeo during his youth. His father's bull riding background clearly passed down a love of that world, and Tommy became genuinely accomplished in junior rodeo competitions. By the time he was 12 years old, he had become a rodeo champion in his age group. This was not a passing hobby. It was a serious commitment that required real athleticism, courage, and skill. The discipline he developed through rodeo and through watching his father perform dangerous stunts shaped the kind of performer he would become, someone who was never afraid of physical work and who brought a grounded, no-nonsense quality to everything he did. He graduated from Saugus High School in 1984 and later attended the National Conservatory of Dramatic Arts to formalize his acting training. But by the time he graduated from high school, his career was already well underway. In 1982, he had appeared in what was one of the most beloved and culturally significant films of that entire decade, Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. His role was a supporting one, and he was credited at the time as Tom Howell rather than C. Thomas Howell, but the film itself became one of the most watched and celebrated movies in cinema history. Being part of that was significant in itself. But the role that truly launched C. Thomas Howell into genuine stardom came in 1983, when legendary director Francis Ford Coppola cast him as Ponyboy Curtis in The Outsiders. The film was based on S.E. Hinton's beloved novel about rival youth gangs in 1960s Oklahoma, and it featured what has to be one of the most extraordinary young casts ever assembled for a single film. Alongside Howell were Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez, Ralph Macchio, and Matt Dillon. Coppola recognized talent in an entire generation of young actors and put them all together in one film, and the result was explosive. Howell, playing the sensitive, literary ponyboy, was the heart of the story. He was 15 years old when the film was made. His performance was tender, real, and deeply felt. Overnight, he became a teen idol. What followed in the immediate years after The Outsiders was a string of films that cemented his place in 1980s popular culture. In 1984 alone, he appeared in Tank, Grandview USA, and Red Dawn, the latter of which reunited him with Patrick Swayze in a Cold War action film about Soviet invasion that became a significant cultural touchstone of the era. He also appeared in Secret Admirer in 1985, continuing to build a reputation as one of the most in-demand young actors in Hollywood. Then came The Hitcher in 1986. This was a genuinely terrifying psychological thriller in which Howell plays Jim Halsey, a young man who picks up a hitchhiker, played with chilling menace by Rutger Hauer, and finds himself being systematically terrorized across the desert highways of the American Southwest. The film is dark, relentless, and disturbing, and Howell's performance as the desperate, increasingly traumatized protagonist was a significant departure from the sensitive ponyboy of The Outsiders. It showed that he could carry a dark, adult thriller. He has spoken in interviews about how The Hitcher was his first real step away from youth roles and into something more complex. However, the film that did the most damage to his career at its commercial peak was also released in 1986, Soul Man. In Soul Man, Howell played a white student who takes tanning pills to darken his skin and pass himself off as black in order to receive a scholarship intended for a minority student. The film was intended as a comedy that made a point about racial inequality, but the execution was deeply problematic even by the standards of 1986, and it was widely criticized for its use of blackface. The film's controversy did real damage to Howell's status as a leading man in mainstream Hollywood, and while it was not the end of his career, it represented a turning point from which recovering his position at the top of the Hollywood hierarchy became very difficult. Through the 1990s, he continued working steadily but increasingly in smaller productions, direct-to-video films, and supporting roles. He appeared in Terry Gilliam's The Fisher King in 1991, playing the Red Knight in a memorable fantasy sequence. He had roles in Inside Out in 1990 and That Night in 1992. He starred as baby-faced Nelson in the 1995 biographical film of the same name. He also starred as the lead in Gettysburg in 1993, the sprawling and highly detailed dramatization of the famous Civil War battle. In 2003, Howell faced a severe personal health crisis when he was hospitalized for 4 weeks due to a ruptured appendix. It was a life-threatening situation. Surgeons had to remove 3 feet of his intestine among other interventions in order to save his life. He lost 45 pounds during the ordeal. It was a genuinely dangerous period, and his recovery required enormous time and physical strength to get through. He made a significant television impression with his role as the sadistic serial killer George Foyt, known as the Reaper, in CBS's Criminal Minds. His appearance as this character was praised by fans of the show as one of the most genuinely frightening villain portrayals in the series' history. He also had a significant recurring role as the unpredictable and morally complex Officer Bill Dewey Dudek in the crime drama series Southland, which aired on NBC and TNT between 2009 and 2013. That role gave him a sustained platform that introduced him to an entirely new generation of television viewers. He appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man in 2012 and in the Netflix series The Punisher in 2017. Outside of acting, Howell has also directed several films, including Pure Danger in 1996, The Big Fall in 1997, The Land That Time Forgot in 2009, and The Day the Earth Stopped in 2008. He has also pursued music as a singer-songwriter under the name Tommy Howell. In his personal life, he was briefly married to actress Lori Loughlin in 1985, a marriage that lasted only a year. He then married actress Rae Dawn Chong in 1989, but that marriage also ended in divorce around 1990. He has been married to his third wife Sylvie since 1991, and together they have 3 children, Isabel, Dashiell, and Liam. Amelie Hofril. Amelie Hofril is one of the youngest and most rapidly rising actresses in contemporary Hollywood, and her story is in many ways the story of a new generation of talent that has grown up moving between different cultures and finding their voice through independent film before breaking into major studio productions. She was born on June 5, 2002, and she carries with her a genuinely bicultural identity that has shaped who she is both as a person and as a performer. Her mother is American, and her father is from Bavaria in southern Germany, and Amelie grew up splitting her time between both countries. She has described herself as a German-American actress, and that experience of living between 2 very different cultures, one intensely European and one American, gave her an early understanding of different ways of seeing the world, different emotional registers, different social dynamics. That kind of cross-cultural upbringing tends to produce people who are perceptive observers of human behavior, which is exactly the quality a young actor most needs. Her interest in acting began early in her childhood, long before she had any professional credits to her name. She began posting content on Instagram in May 2018, which suggests she was already engaged with building an artistic and public identity as a young teenager. But her first real acting credit came in 2019, when she appeared in a short film called Boogie Woman, directed by Erica Scoggins. She played a character named Sam in the film, and it was a genuine acting role in a serious independent short film project. Boogie Woman went on to premiere at the Clermont-Ferrand International Short Film Festival, which is one of the most prestigious short film festivals in the world. For a debut credit, premiering at that festival was a significant accomplishment. From there, she continued working in independent short films and smaller projects throughout 2019 into the early 2020s, building her craft in the way that the best young actors do, by working, taking risks, learning from directors who are trying to say something real with limited resources. She appeared in a short film called Bodies, directed by Jacob Anderson, and was also part of an anthology project called Tapestry, which brought together international women sharing stories of immigration and personal experience. These were not commercial projects designed to build a brand. They were artistically motivated work that said something about who Amelie Hofril was as a young woman and as a performer. Her breakthrough into major studio productions came in 2023 when she was cast in The Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This is the prequel to the enormously successful Hunger Games franchise, and it tells the origin story of the series' primary villain, President Snow. The film starred Tom Blythe as the young Coriolanus Snow and Rachel Zegler as Lucy Gray Baird, and it brought in a large ensemble of young performers to populate the world of the capital and the districts. Amelie played a character named Vipsania Sickle, one of the young tributes and capital students who surround the central story. The film was a major global release and introduced her to an audience of many millions of people around the world. Being part of the Hunger Games universe, even in a supporting capacity, carries significant weight in the entertainment industry. She followed that with another major horror production in 2024, Night Swim, produced by Blumhouse Productions, one of the most successful and prolific horror production companies in Hollywood. In Night Swim, she played Izzy Waller, the teenage daughter of a family that moves into a new home with a swimming pool that turns out to harbor something deeply dangerous and supernatural. The film is centered on the family unit and the horror that emerges from within the domestic space, and Izzy is a character who must face terrifying events while also managing the emotional complexity of watching her family fall apart. Amelie brought real vulnerability and strength to the role, and the performance demonstrated that she was not simply passing through the horror genre but genuinely thriving in it. In 2025, she appeared in what may be the most prestigious project of her career to date, Eddington, a film directed by Ari Aster. Aster is one of the most critically celebrated directors working in contemporary cinema, known for Hereditary and Midsommar, two films that fundamentally changed what audiences and critics understood horror and dread could look and feel like. Eddington starred Joaquin Phoenix, Emma Stone, and Pedro Pascal, and the ensemble also included Amelie in a supporting role. Being part of a cast assembled by Ari Aster and featuring actors of that caliber at age 22 or 23 is an extraordinary sign of where her career is heading. She has also appeared in the television series Sterling Point, produced by Amazon Prime Video, in which she plays a character named Ramona across 8 episodes. The series is based on a young adult story directed by Megan Park and features Amelie alongside Ella Rubin in a lead role that gives her sustained, long-form television experience to add to her growing film credits. With 1 Mile in 2026, Amelie Hofrel took on the role of Alex Beckett, the teenage daughter at the center of the story. The role required her to be physically present in intense survival scenarios, to convey years of emotional distance from a father she never really had, and then to find the courage and strength within herself to fight back against an impossible threat. She was 23 years old during production. The performance she delivered in the film, particularly in the moments where Alex's relationship with Danny begins to thaw and then in the brutal sequences of survival and confrontation, showed the depth that those years of independent film work and those big studio productions had been quietly building in her. Sarah Canning. Sarah Canning was born on July 14, 1987, in Gander, Newfoundland, a small city on the island of Newfoundland on the eastern edge of Canada, known internationally primarily because it was one of the places where American airline flights were diverted on September 11, 2001, and the local community opened its arms to thousands of stranded travelers. Newfoundland has a deep culture of community, warmth, and storytelling, and growing up there clearly left a mark on Sarah Canning as a person. Her earliest years were spent in an even smaller place called Brown's Arm, a tiny community in Newfoundland, where she lived until she was 11 years old. Then the family relocated to Sherwood Park, a suburb near Edmonton in the province of Alberta, on the other side of Canada entirely. Moving from a tiny rural community in Newfoundland to the suburbs of a major prairie city was a significant transition for a child, and it forced a kind of adaptability and openness that would serve her well later in her life and work. Her father Wayne and her mother Daphne Canning provided a household that combined two very different professional worlds. Her father had a background in the military, and her mother worked in the medical field as a nurse. Growing up in that environment, with its combination of discipline, structure, and the deep human awareness that comes from medical work, shaped Sarah into someone with a grounded, thoughtful approach to people and to her craft. She became deeply involved in figure skating from a young age and competed seriously for 10 years. Figure skating at a competitive level is not a casual pursuit. It demands years of daily practice, physical dedication, mental discipline, and the ability to perform under pressure in front of an audience. All of that maps directly onto what makes a great actor, and the training she received through years of competitive skating gave her a physical poise, a stage presence, and a tolerance for the vulnerability of performing publicly that most aspiring actors have to develop much later and much more deliberately. Her interest in theater emerged when she was attending Fr. Haythorne Junior High. The transition from figure skating to theater felt natural. Both required performance, emotional commitment, and the willingness to be seen. She continued doing theater throughout her time at Bev Facey Community High School, participating in multiple stage productions and performing at Festival Place, a theater venue in her local community. She was clearly serious about it, because by the time she graduated from high school, theater was not just a hobby, it was where she intended to spend her life. She began studying general arts at the University of Alberta, where she briefly considered a path toward journalism. But the pull of performance was too strong. At 19, she made the decision that every serious young Canadian actor eventually has to make. She left school and moved to Vancouver, the city where the majority of Canada's film and television production takes place. She enrolled in the screen acting program at Vancouver Film School and completed the full year-long course in 2007. Vancouver Film School is one of the most respected film and performance training institutions in Canada, and its screen acting program is specifically designed to prepare performers for the practical, camera-specific work of professional television and film production. During those early years in Vancouver, Sarah was doing what young actors do, working part-time at a restaurant to pay the bills while auditioning and building her resume. The early television credits began accumulating. She found an agent and started landing roles. Her first significant on-screen credit came in 2008 when she appeared in the television film Paparazzi Princess, the Paris Hilton story, in which she played Nikki Hilton. She also appeared in the popular television series Smallville in 2008 and in Kyle XY in 2009. She played a character in Taken in broad daylight that same year. Then, in 2009, everything changed with The Vampire Diaries. The CW's supernatural drama was based on the popular book series by L.J. Smith and centered on the vampire mythology surrounding the town of Mystic Falls, Virginia, and the complicated relationships between its human and supernatural inhabitants. Sarah was cast as Jenna Summers, the young aunt of the show's protagonist Elena Gilbert, who takes on the responsibility of raising Elena and her brother Jeremy after their parents are killed. Jenna was a complex character. She was not superhuman, not supernatural, just a regular young woman who had been handed an overwhelming responsibility, and was navigating it as best she could while also trying to have some semblance of her own life. The Vampire Diaries became a massive global hit, running for 8 seasons and developing one of the most devoted fan bases in the history of genre television. Sarah's portrayal of Jenna resonated with audiences because she brought genuine warmth, humor, and emotional depth to a character who could easily have been reduced to a plot device. Jenna's story eventually took a very dark turn in the storyline. She becomes a vampire against her will and is ultimately killed, giving Sarah some of the show's most emotionally intense dramatic material to work with. Her performance across those seasons earned her a global following and established her as a serious television actress. After The Vampire Diaries, she lived in Atlanta, Georgia, for 2 years, the city where the show was filmed, before returning to Vancouver. That experience of living in a completely different city with a completely different culture from what she had grown up with in Canada broadened her perspective both personally and professionally. She went on to lead the Canadian science fiction series Primeval, New World from 2012 to 2013, playing the character of Dylan Weir. The series was a Canadian spin-off of the British science fiction franchise Primeval, and it gave Sarah the experience of carrying a genre series as one of its primary leads. She followed that with the Canadian medical drama Remedy, which ran from 2014 to 2015 and in which she played Dr. Melissa Connor, a medical professional working in a hospital environment. That role in particular required a different register entirely, less supernatural tension and more grounded, procedural, emotionally realistic drama. She was nominated for multiple awards for her work in Remedy and won on 2 occasions. Her film work has ranged across genres and scales. She appeared in War for the Planet of the Apes in 2017, the 3rd installment of the rebooted Planet of the Apes franchise starring Andy Serkis. She appeared in the science fiction thriller Level 16 in 2018, a deeply unsettling film about young women in a boarding school who discover the horrifying truth about their situation. She also appeared in the Banana Splits movie in 2018 and the horror film Superhost in 2021. Sarah Canning has always been deeply private about her personal life. She has never married and has consistently chosen not to discuss her romantic relationships publicly, which is both unusual and admirable in the entertainment industry. She plays guitar, loves animals, she has a husky named Molly, enjoys traveling, and has an interest in psychology. She has spoken about her favorite actresses including Gwyneth Paltrow, Amanda Seyfried, and Julia Roberts, and her favorite films include Dear John and Notting Hill. In 1 Mile, she plays Janine Beckett, Danny's estranged wife. The role required her to portray a woman who has spent years raising a daughter largely alone while her husband was deployed, who has built a life and a career of her own as a nurse, and who is now cautiously allowing her family to come back together. In Chapter 2, Janine is taken hostage by Stanley, placing her directly in the most dangerous moment of the story and forcing Danny to make impossible choices. It is a smaller role than her work in Vampire Diaries, but Sarah Canning brought to it the same quiet, human authenticity that has defined her career from the very beginning. 1 Mile, 2026, Budget, Making of, and Funny Moments on Set. Let us start with the honest truth about the budget of 1 Mile, because it is something that was never officially disclosed to the public. The production team, the studio, and the distributors never released an official number. There is no confirmed budget figure attached to this film anywhere in any official capacity. What we do know, and what every film critic, every reviewer, and every person who watched the movie and commented on it has agreed on, is that this was a low-budget, direct-to-video production. It was not a Marvel movie. It was not a big studio blockbuster with hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. It was a lean, scrappy, get-it-done production that stretched every dollar it had as far as it could go. To understand the budget in real terms, you have to understand the category this film belongs to. 1 Mile falls into what the industry calls the DTV space, direct-to-video or direct-to-digital. These are films that are made with budgets typically ranging anywhere from $2 million at the very low end to around $15 or $20 million at the higher end for productions that have recognizable names attached. Given that Ryan Phillip was the lead and also served as a producer, and given that C. Thomas Howell was brought in as a supporting actor of serious experience, the budget was almost certainly somewhere in the range of $5 to $12 million for both chapters combined. This is an educated estimate based on the category, the cast, the scope of production, and the fact that both films were shot simultaneously in a back-to-back production model across Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. The decision to shoot both Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 at the same time was itself a direct product of budget thinking. Shooting 2 films simultaneously, sharing the same crew, the same locations, the same equipment, and the same production infrastructure across both projects meant that the producers could produce 2 feature-length films for considerably less money than it would cost to shoot them separately with months of downtime in between. It was a smart, practical, economically driven decision. Production began on Vancouver Island on September 9, 2024, and the entire shoot, covering material for both films, was completed under a single, unified production schedule. Post-production for both films was then handled in Vancouver. The choice to film in British Columbia was also partly a budget decision. Canada, and British Columbia specifically, has for decades been one of the most attractive filming destinations in the world for American productions precisely because of the combination of extremely favorable tax incentives, a world-class crew base, and landscapes that can stand in for almost any environment a filmmaker needs. The forests of Vancouver Island are dense, dark, imposing, and absolutely real. There was no need to build elaborate sets to create the feeling of wilderness isolation that the story demanded. The woods were already there. The rivers were already there. The rocky terrain was already there. The entire natural environment of Vancouver Island became the production design of 1 mile without a single dollar being spent on constructing it. That is the kind of location intelligence that low-budget filmmakers rely on to make their movies look far more expensive than they actually are. The film used a relatively small crew by industry standards. There were no massive visual effects sequences, no CGI-heavy action, no elaborate creature work, or digital environments. The approach to the film was deliberately grounded, practical, and physical, which kept costs manageable. Even the decision to remove most conventional gunplay from the action sequences, a creative choice that director Adam Davidson and Ryan Phillip both spoke about in interviews, also happened to be a budget-friendly choice. Gunfire sequences in film require specialized safety coordinators, special effects crews, prop weapons, and significant time on set. Hand-to-hand combat, while physically demanding and requiring its own choreography and stunt coordination, is generally cheaper to film than extended firearm sequences. The artistic choice and the practical choice aligned perfectly in this case. The film was distributed by Republic Pictures, which is a label under Paramount Pictures. Republic Pictures has historically been the home of lower-budget genre films and direct-to-video action content distributed by the major studio. Having the Paramount umbrella behind the distribution meant professional marketing materials, wide digital distribution across all major platforms, and a well-produced trailer, all of which gave 1 mile a professional presentation that belied its modest budget. The rental and purchase pricing on digital platforms was set at around $5.99 to rent and $7.99 to buy each chapter. Both chapters were also available as a bundle. This pricing structure, combined with no significant theatrical run to generate traditional box office revenue, meant the film's financial success was dependent entirely on digital sales volume. A business model that is now well established in the DTV space and has proven profitable for productions like this when they have recognizable names attached and strong genre appeal. Now, with all of that said, let us get into what is genuinely the more interesting part of this discussion, what actually happened on set. Because the interviews that Ryan Phillip and C. Thomas Howell gave in the weeks around the film's release are full of genuinely entertaining, funny, and revealing moments about what it was actually like to make this movie. The most immediately funny dynamic on set was the physical one between Ryan Phillip and C. Thomas Howell. These are two men who have both spent significant portions of their careers doing physical work. Ryan Phillip is a black belt in multiple martial arts, has spent decades training his body for action roles, and at 51 years old is still in remarkable physical condition. C. Thomas Howell grew up in a stunt family, competed in junior rodeo, and has his own deeply ingrained physical background. When these two men were put together on a set where the job was to fight each other, the result was something that everyone on set found equal parts impressive and entertaining. In one of his interviews, C. Thomas Howell spoke with genuine amusement about the dynamic. He explained that from his personal perspective as someone who grew up around stunts and action, he was perfectly happy to stand back and watch Ryan Phillip get thrown into freezing cold water and run full speed over rocky terrain. He made it very clear that he had no particular desire to be on the receiving end of the more brutal physical demands of the production. He said, and this is a direct window into the humor that lived on that set, that he is very aware of the fact that Ryan Phillip is a black belt in multiple martial arts, and that awareness made him deeply cautious about ever actually making Ryan genuinely angry on set. He was laughing when he said it, but there was also the very real undercurrent of a man who had watched someone snap through fight choreography with expert precision and decided the wisest course of action was professional respect and appropriate personal distance. But Howell also admitted that it was not all one-sided. He acknowledged with a laugh that they had their moments where he got to take things out on Ryan as well. The nature of their characters in the film, Danny and Stanley, the hero and the villain in direct opposition, meant that the physical confrontations between them were genuine back-and-forth exchanges, and both men gave as good as they got. What made this particularly amusing in retrospect was that one of the things that sealed the deal was the character of Alex being described as a teenager who is secretly passionate about art but hiding it from the world. Ryan had this perfectly written artistic young woman in a script, and then Amelie Hofer walked in and turned out to be a genuinely passionate visual artist herself in real life. The art that appears in the film, the sketchbook, the illustrations. Ryan also spoke about what Amelie was like to work with during the physically demanding sequences. These were not easy conditions. The film was shot on Vancouver Island in autumn and into the colder months, and several of the sequences required actors to be in or near extremely cold water. There were scenes shot in rivers, scenes involving rain and mud and rocky terrain, scenes that required running full speed through actual forest at night. By any measure, it was a physically grueling production. Ryan noted in interviews that Amelie never complained once. Not once. Through everything, the cold water, the rough terrain, the long shooting days, all of it, she simply did the work, and the quality of what she delivered in those moments was consistently excellent. Another detail that emerged from behind-the-scenes discussions was the origin of. Ryan also talked in interviews about the fact that being a parent in real life gave him. The filming conditions on Vancouver Island were a consistent source of both admiration and dark humor among the cast and crew. Vancouver Island in late autumn and early winter is cold, damp. The stunt team on the film was consistently praised by both Philip and Howell in interviews. The choreography for the hand-to-hand combat sequences was worked out in There is also something genuinely amusing about the fact that this film, which is fundamentally about a father and daughter road trip that goes catastrophically wrong, was itself born out of an actual father and daughter road trip, and that the lead actor on the film, who plays a father reconnecting with his daughter, is himself a That is the story of how 1 Mile was made, what it cost, and what it was actually like on set to bring it to life. Cold water, black belts, 100 audition tapes, one piece of real teenage artwork, and 2 men in their 50s running through Canadian forests in the rain. 1 Mile, 2026, the cultural and historical context of the film. To truly understand 1 Mile as a piece of storytelling, you cannot simply watch it as an action thriller about a father rescuing his daughter from dangerous people in the woods. That surface reading is accurate but incomplete. Underneath the survival sequences and the hand-to-hand combat and the tension of the wilderness, 1 Mile is a film that is built on top of several very deep, very real layers of American cultural and historical experience. Every major element of this story, the road trip, the off-grid community, the military veteran at its center, the father-daughter fracture, the wilderness itself as a space of both freedom and threat, has roots that stretch back through decades and in some cases centuries of American life. Understanding those roots does not just make the movie more intellectually interesting. It makes the emotional logic of the film click into place in a way that pure plot summary never can. Let us start at the very beginning, with the most foundational element of the entire story, the road trip itself. The American road trip is one of the oldest and most deeply embedded cultural rituals in the United States. It did not begin with automobiles and it did not begin with highways. It began with the idea that the act of moving across the vast, open landscape of the American continent was itself a form of self-definition. Long before there were cars, the movement of American people across difficult terrain was already central to the national mythology. The covered wagon journeys of the 19th century, the settlers pushing westward along the Oregon Trail, the gold rush migrations of 1849, all of these were stories about Americans loading what they owned into whatever vehicle they had and moving through unfamiliar wilderness towards something they hoped would be better. The road trip as a cultural institution is essentially the automobile-era version of that same ancient American impulse. The modern road trip tradition, as most Americans experience it today, really began to take shape in the early 20th century. The first documented cross-country automobile journey happened in 1903, when a man named Horatio Jackson drove from San Francisco to New York City over 63 days to win a $50 bet. Jackson did not even own a car at the start of the journey. He bought one, hired a mechanic, and simply went. That spirit of improvised, stubborn, forward motion in the face of total uncertainty is something deeply American, and it echoes in the DNA of 1 Mile, because Danny Beckett's survival mission is built on exactly the same qualities. He does not have a plan when he goes after his daughter. He has training, determination, and the willingness to move forward through impossible conditions until he reaches where he needs to go. After World War II, the American road trip became a true mass cultural phenomenon. Post-war prosperity gave working and middle-class families disposable income and vacation time for the first time on a wide scale. The creation of the interstate highway system in the 1950s under President Eisenhower connected the country in a way that made cross-country travel genuinely practical for ordinary families. Automobile ownership exploded. Roadside motels, diners, gas stations, and tourist attractions bloomed along every major highway. The open road became synonymous in American culture with freedom, opportunity, independence, and the idea that you could go anywhere and become anyone. By the time Jack Kerouac published his novel On the Road in 1957, the road trip had already completed its transformation from practical travel method into a full-blown cultural mythology, a symbol of the American restlessness, the belief that movement itself is meaningful, and the idea that somewhere down a long highway, something important is waiting to be found. The college tour road trip specifically, which is the immediate context for 1 Mile, is itself a distinctly American cultural ritual rooted in the country's particular relationship with higher education. The United States has one of the most extensive and geographically spread out university systems in the world. Unlike many other countries where universities are concentrated in 1 or 2 major cities, American colleges and universities are distributed across every state, every region, every landscape. A student from Delaware might be choosing between a school in Massachusetts, a school in California, a school in Ohio, and a school in Texas, and visiting each of those campuses might involve thousands of miles of travel. The college tour road trip, loading the family into a car, hitting the highways, visiting campuses, sitting in on information sessions, eating in strange towns, sleeping in budget motels, and having long conversations on the drive about futures and dreams and choices, has become one of the most recognizable rites of passage in American family life. It is the moment where a child becomes a young adult in the eyes of the family, and where the family itself must begin the emotional process of letting go. In 1 Mile, Aaron Kaplan and his daughter Jaden were on exactly this kind of college tour road trip in rural New Hampshire in 2019 when the idea for the film was born. The road, the isolation, the lack of cell service, the feeling of being genuinely far from help, all of it grew from a real experience. The film uses the college tour as its emotional launching point because it is a space that every American family recognizes. A space loaded with expectation and anxiety and possibility, and the disruption of that space by extreme violence makes what happens feel all the more jarring and wrong. Now let us talk about what 1 Mile places in the wilderness that Danny and Alex stumble into, the off-grid community led by Stanley Dixon, because this element of the film has the richest and most complex cultural and historical background of anything in the story. Off-grid communities, isolated settlements, and intentional communes have existed in American history since before the United States was even a nation. The earliest European settlers in North America were themselves a kind of off-grid community, groups of people who had decided, for religious, political, or economic reasons, that they could not live within the constraints of the society they had left behind. The Puritan communities of New England in the 17th century were built on the idea that a pure, godly, self-sufficient society could be constructed if you separated yourself from corruption and temptation. The idea of building a righteous or ideal community in physical separation from a corrupt mainstream is as old as America itself. This tradition of intentional community building in isolation from mainstream society continued through every era of American history. In the 19th century, dozens of utopian communes were established across the country by groups with widely varying ideologies. The Shakers built self-sufficient communities of religious celibates across the Northeast and Midwest. The Oneida Community, founded in New York in 1848 by John Humphrey Noyes, was a radical religious commune that practiced communal ownership of property, and a form of shared marriage that mainstream society found deeply threatening. Brook Farm in Massachusetts, founded in 1841, was a literary and philosophical commune associated with the Transcendentalist movement whose members included authors and intellectuals who believed that a simpler, more connected life away from industrial society was morally superior. Some of these communities were peaceful and genuinely idealistic. Others were controlling, manipulative, and abusive behind their stated ideals. The pattern of a charismatic leader creating a closed community with its own rules, its own hierarchy, and its own definition of what constitutes acceptable behavior is one of the most recurring patterns in American social history. In the 20th century, this tradition took on new urgency and new political dimensions. The 1960s and 1970s saw an enormous explosion of intentional communities and back-to-the-land movements across the United States. Young Americans disillusioned by the Vietnam War, mainstream consumer culture, racial inequality, and what they saw as the spiritual emptiness of American life began leaving cities and suburbs in significant numbers to establish communes, collectives, and homesteads in rural areas. These communities varied enormously in their beliefs and practices. Some were genuinely peaceful and sustainable. The Back to the Land movement produced real communities that practiced ecological farming, communal childcare, shared labor, and genuine attempts at democratic self-governance. But others were built around more controlling dynamics: a single charismatic leader, an enforced doctrine, a closed social structure where leaving was psychologically or physically dangerous. The darker end of this spectrum produced some of the most traumatic events in American cultural memory. The People's Temple, led by Jim Jones, established a community in San Francisco in the 1970s that eventually relocated to the jungles of Guyana, where in 1978 over 900 people died in a mass murder-suicide that shocked the entire world and permanently embedded the phrase Jonestown in the American consciousness as a symbol of how isolated authoritarian communities can twist ordinary human beings into instruments of catastrophe. The Branch Davidians, led by David Koresh, established a compound outside Waco, Texas, that operated for years as a closed, authoritarian religious community before the catastrophic federal siege of 1993 that ended in fire and the deaths of more than 70 people. These events became defining cultural moments that shaped how Americans thought about isolated communities, charismatic leaders, and the relationship between self-imposed separation from society and the potential for extreme violence. The survivalist and prepper movement, which overlaps significantly with the off-grid community phenomenon, has its own rich and complicated history in American culture. Survivalism as a distinct cultural movement emerged in the Cold War era, when the genuine fear of nuclear annihilation pushed some Americans toward building bunkers, stockpiling supplies, and developing plans for surviving a catastrophic collapse of modern civilization. The publication of books like How to Survive the Coming Bad Years by Howard Ruff in 1979 helped create a publishing genre and a subculture simultaneously. The militia movements of the 1980s and 1990s combined survivalist thinking with political radicalism, anti-government ideology, and a deep suspicion of federal authority. The Oklahoma City bombing of 1995, carried out by Timothy McVeigh, who had connections to militia culture, brought this subculture into the mainstream consciousness in the most horrifying possible way. After September 11, 2001, preparedness culture underwent a significant shift. What had previously been associated primarily with fringe politics and radical ideology was suddenly being recommended by the federal government itself. FEMA told Americans to have emergency kits. Authorities encouraged disaster planning. The difference between a paranoid survivalist and a responsible, prepared citizens suddenly became a matter of degree rather than kind. By 2010, polls showed that roughly 50% of Americans were thinking about personal preparedness in some form, a number that had been below 20% just a few years earlier. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and the Great Recession of 2008 had reinforced the anxiety that mainstream systems could and did fail ordinary people, and that self-sufficiency was not just a fringe ideology but a rational response to an unreliable world. The off-grid community in 1 Mile sits at the darkest intersection of all these historical threads. Stanley Dixon's people are not idealistic back-to-the-landers trying to grow their own food and live in harmony with nature. They are not religious seekers looking for a purer spiritual life. They have become something much older and more dangerous, a closed, patriarchal authority structure built around one man's will, sustained by fear, and willing to commit acts of profound violence and violation against outsiders in the name of the community's survival. The specific horror of what Stanley's community does, kidnapping women from the outside world and using them as reproductive vessels, draws on one of the most persistent and disturbing patterns in the history of closed communities, which is the tendency of systems built around masculine authority to eventually reduce women to their reproductive function and strip them of autonomy in the name of the group's survival and continuity. This is not a fictional invention without real-world parallels. Real documented instances of controlled communities that restricted women's movement, controlled their reproduction, and used isolation to prevent escape have existed throughout American history and continue to exist in various forms. The FLDS, the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, practiced a form of polygamy in isolated compounds in Utah, Arizona, and Texas, in which underage girls were married to much older men and women were kept in states of economic and social dependency that made leaving nearly impossible. Warren Jeffs, the group's leader, was eventually convicted on charges including sexual assault of a child and conspiracy to commit sexual misconduct, and is currently serving a life sentence. These are not distant historical events, they are recent, documented American realities, and they give the horror at the center of Stanley Dixon's community a grounding in genuine cultural truth that makes it all the more disturbing. Now let us turn to the other major cultural and historical context that saturates every scene featuring Danny Beckett, the American military veteran and the crisis of return. The United States has maintained a large, professional standing military throughout most of the modern era, and particularly since World War II. The decades following the September 11, 2001 attacks produced two prolonged wars, the war in Afghanistan, which lasted 20 years from 2001 to 2021, and the Iraq War, which began in 2003 and whose aftermath extended for more than a decade after the formal withdrawal of combat troops. These conflicts produced an enormous number of veterans who served multiple tours of deployment, were exposed to sustained combat stress, and then returned to civilian life carrying experiences that most of their fellow citizens could not begin to understand. Post-traumatic stress disorder has been recognized as a formal medical diagnosis since 1980, when the American Psychiatric Association added it to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders following sustained research on Vietnam War veterans. But the psychological wounds of warfare are far older than the formal diagnosis. During the Civil War, doctors described soldiers returning from battle with symptoms of what they called irritable heart or soldier's heart, rapid pulse, severe anxiety, difficulty breathing, and inability to reintegrate into civilian life. In World War I, the condition was called shell shock. In World War II, it was battle fatigue. The names changed, but the reality did not. War changes people in ways that persist long after the fighting stops, and those changes create enormous difficulties when soldiers try to return to the lives they left behind. For Special Forces soldiers specifically, the category that Danny Beckett belongs to in 1 Mile, the psychological challenge of return is compounded by a particular kind of professional isolation. Special Forces operators are trained to suppress emotional responses, to function under extreme stress without hesitation, to operate in small teams with intense loyalty and discipline, and to compartmentalize the moral complexity of the things they are required to do in combat. These skills keep them alive and effective in the field. But when they come home, the same compartmentalization that made them exceptional soldiers can make them emotionally unavailable to their families in ways that are deeply painful for everyone involved. Research has consistently shown that veterans with PTSD symptoms, which frequently include emotional withdrawal, hypervigilance, irritability, and difficulty forming close emotional bonds, experience higher rates of marital breakdown, parental estrangement, and social isolation than the general population. Danny Beckett's broken marriage and his distant relationship with Alex are not simply convenient plot devices to give him something to fight for. They are culturally and historically accurate portraits of what happens to many military families over the course of long, repeated deployments. Janine, Danny's wife, did not abandon him. She built a life she could sustain in his absence, raised a daughter largely alone, and held things together for years while he was somewhere on the other side of the world doing things she would never fully know about. Alex did not resent her father because she was immature or ungrateful. She grew up not knowing him, which is a different kind of wound than anger. It is the wound of a relationship that was never fully formed in the first place. These dynamics played out in real American families across the 20 years of the post-9/11 wars, and they continue to play out today as veterans of those conflicts try to re-enter domestic lives that moved on without them. The image of the warrior father who has mastered every form of external threat but cannot find his way back to his own child is one of the most emotionally resonant and culturally specific images in contemporary American storytelling. It appears in everything from high literary fiction to television dramas to action thrillers, because it speaks to something that millions of American families have lived through in one form or another. 1 Mile uses the survival thriller format to externalize this interior crisis. Danny cannot reconnect with Alex through conversation alone. The emotional distance between them is too great, the silence too practiced, the absence too long. It takes the extreme pressure of genuine mortal danger to strip away all of that distance and force them into the kind of raw, physical, life and death closeness that reveals who they actually are to each other. There is also a specifically American cultural tradition of the lone man in the wilderness who uses physical skill and personal resolve to protect those he loves against overwhelming odds. This archetype goes back to the very earliest American frontier mythology. The figure of the frontiersman, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, the various real and legendary individuals who carved survival out of hostile wilderness using nothing but skill, courage, and determined self-reliance, is one of the founding myths of American cultural identity. These figures were celebrated not just as individuals but as embodiments of a national ideal, the idea that a single, capable, morally motivated person can overcome any obstacle through the force of their own will and skill. The genre of the vigilante action film that 1 Mile belongs to is the 20th and 21st century heir to this very old tradition. Films like Walking Tall in 1973, Death Wish beginning in 1974, and First Blood in 1982 all drew on this same cultural reservoir, the idea of an ordinary or extraordinary man forced by circumstances into a violent confrontation with the threat that official society cannot or will not handle, and winning through individual determination and the moral clarity of his cause. Ryan Phillip noted in interviews that director Adam Davidson specifically framed 1 Mile as a film in the tradition of those 1970s movies, raw, personal, face-to-face rather than cinematic and glossy. That framing is deliberately culturally specific. The 1970s action film tradition emerged in an era of deep American disillusionment, post-Vietnam, post-Watergate, post the civic upheavals of the 1960s, when audiences responded to stories about individuals who bypassed broken or corrupt institutions and handled things themselves. That same underlying cultural anxiety about the reliability of institutions, about whether the official systems of society can be trusted to protect ordinary people, runs through 1 mile just as clearly. Danny does not call police. There are no police. There is no cell service, no backup, no institutional response to fall back on. There is only him, his training, and his daughter. That is precisely the scenario that the American lone wolf mythology was built to address, and 1 mile deploys it with full awareness of the tradition it is working within. The film setting in the deep wilderness of Vancouver Island, standing in for the remote forests of the American Northeast, also carries its own cultural weight. The American wilderness has always been a charged and complicated space in the national imagination. On one hand, it is the space of freedom, beauty, adventure, and spiritual renewal. The national park system, established in 1916, was built on the conviction that the wilderness of the American continent was a public treasure that should be protected and made accessible, and the tradition of the American camping trip as a family bonding experience has deep cultural roots. On the other hand, the wilderness in American storytelling has also always been a space of danger, of the unknown, of what lies beyond the reach of civilization and its protections. The earliest American frontier narratives were filled with anxieties about what lived in the forest beyond the settlement's edge. Gothic literature in the 19th century used the dark, remote wilderness as a space where ordinary rules did not apply and where ordinary people could encounter forces beyond their control or understanding. The horror tradition in American film has drawn on this same cultural anxiety for generations, from the isolated farmhouses of slasher films to the remote woodlands of survival thrillers. 1 mile draws on all of this simultaneously. The wilderness that Danny and Alex drive into is simultaneously the beautiful, inviting natural world of the American road trip fantasy and the dark, hostile, beyond civilization space of Gothic threat. The road that leads to the campground on 1 mile road looks like freedom and ends in captivity. The forest that was supposed to be a scenic backdrop for a father-daughter bonding trip becomes a combat zone. That inversion, the idyllic becoming dangerous, the freedom becoming a trap, is one of the oldest moves in American storytelling, and it is executed in 1 mile with full cultural awareness of what the wilderness means in the American imagination. The film's treatment of women within Stanley's community also carries significant cultural commentary. The women in Stanley's world are reduced to their biological function and denied any form of independent agency. They are used, controlled, isolated, and kept in a state of dependency that is rationalized by the community's patriarchal logic as necessary for survival. This reflects a historically persistent pattern in closed communities, and more broadly in various forms of patriarchal social organization, where women's autonomy is the first thing to be restricted when a controlling authority structure decides and knows better than individuals what is good for the group. The fact that Alex, the young woman at the center of the film's story, ultimately escapes this fate not just through her father's intervention but through her own courage, her own willingness to fight, and her own decisive action at the film's climax, shooting Stanley and saving her father's life, is culturally meaningful. It refuses to leave Alex in the position of passive victim rescued by a capable man. She is active, she is decisive, and she is the one who ends the threat. For a film operating in the action thriller genre, which has historically had a complicated and often reductive relationship with female characters, that is a notable choice. The question of what one generation owes another, parents to children, children to parents, and the ways in which military service and national duty strain those obligations almost beyond repair, runs through 1 mile at every level. It is a question that American culture has been wrestling with specifically in the context of the post-9/11 wars for over 2 decades. The soldier who served his country and lost his family in the process, and who must now find a way back to the people he loves, is a figure that appears constantly in the cultural landscape of early 21st century America, in novels, in films, in television, in journalism, in the personal stories of thousands of military families that never get told publicly. 1 mile puts this figure into the most extreme possible circumstances and asks whether the skills that the military gave Danny, skills that cost him his family in the first place, can now be used to save the relationship those skills helped destroy? That is the question at the heart of the film, and it is a question rooted in one of the most painful and unresolved tensions in contemporary American life. That is the full cultural and historical context of 1 Mile, a film that works on the surface as an action survival thriller and works at a deeper level as a document of American anxieties about wilderness, isolation, military sacrifice, family fracture, and the long shadow of a 20-year war. If you found this breakdown valuable and interesting, please hit the like button and share this video with anyone who wants to understand movies at a level deeper than plot summary. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.